Okay, we're still in chapter 6, and we are now talking about the roles of proteins. So we eat food, and that food has proteins in it. Those proteins can be used for energy. Those proteins are also going to be broken down into amino acids. Amino acids are then taken by the cells and, based on the genetic code, turned back into proteins. And what kinds of proteins are then made? That's the section that we're going to talk about now, the roles of proteins in the body. We have lots of different ones: structural proteins, enzymes, hormones, fluid balance proteins, acid-base balance proteins, transportation proteins, antibodies, and we're going to look at each one of these. So we start off here with structural proteins. That proteins make up the structural components of the body. For instance, the matrix, if you look at your skin, the dermis of the skin is mostly made up of collagen, which is a protein. If you look at bone, you will see that the main structure of bone is actually made by the collagen, and the calcium is packed around it to help make it hardened. Other tissues like scar tissues are also made out of collagen. So collagen is a big structural component of the body. Enzymes are proteins, and enzymes, what they do is they are able to take two smaller things, which we call reactants, that can be atoms or molecules, and put those together into a bigger structure. Or it can take a bigger structure and break it down into the two smaller components. So enzymes are capable of the two parts of metabolism, which is either anabolism, which is building something up, or catabolism, which is breaking something down. So when you eat a food, the enzymes, like proteases, take a big structure like a protein or peptide and break it down into the smaller products like amino acids. And then your body has enzymes that take the amino acids and put them together into longer structures that may end up being a collagen protein or something. So enzymes break down the food you eat and then take the breakdown products and use those as reactants to build up the structures of the body and to run the body. So enzymes are the workers of the body. They speed up chemical reactions because these compounds may be able to react with each other and get together anyway, but it may take an unreasonable amount of time to do so, and so enzymes speed up how quickly it would take for those reactions to occur. Hormones in the body can be made out of protein. Hormones can be made out of steroids as well, but things like growth hormone, insulin, glucagon, thyroxine that regulates the metabolic rate, calcitonin and parathyroid that regulate blood calcium, antidiuretic hormone, all of those are made out of proteins. Proteins help to, here's insulin also, which we mentioned there. There's a picture of insulin. And you can see it's a string of amino acids that are put together in polypeptides and bonded to make a protein. Okay? Proteins act as regulators of fluid balance. So it turns out that fluid is going to be passing through blood vessels and moving past cells. The fluids have to leave the blood vessels, go out and deliver the nutrients and oxygen to the cells, and then the fluids have to carry the wastes and carbon dioxide out of the cells back into the blood vessels so they can be gotten rid of by the kidneys and the lungs when it comes to carbon dioxide. So fluids have to carry materials out to the cell and carry wastes away from the cell. How do the fluids know to go back into the blood vessels after they've gone out into the interstitial fluid around the cell? There are proteins in here, and the proteins exert pressure on the water, we call oncotic pressure, that pulls the water back in. So the actual beating of the heart, hydrostatic pressure, sort of pushes the fluid out of, and there are pores in here, which they don't show you, pushes the water out, but then the proteins pull it back in. So these proteins act as regulators of water balance. if you don't have those proteins, then what happens is the water builds up in the interstitial areas of the body and doesn't go back into the bloodstream, and it causes edema. You'll see this a lot, those of you going into nursing. Proteins also can act as acid-base regulators. Quick review of what acids and bases are. An acid is anything that when you put it into water separates into a hydrogen and some other compound or atom. The part of its hydrogen. When you put hydrogens in water, that makes it an acid. A base is something that when you put a base in water, it separates into a hydroxyl, which is an oxygen and hydrogen, it's negative, plus whatever it was bound to. And so if you have a hydroxyl released, that's a base. Now notice that hydrogen is one part of water and a hydroxyl is the other part of water. So acid is one half of water, base is the other half of water. Okay, now the pH scale of the blood is about 7.35 to 7.45, and so it's a range. They give you a specific number in this picture. But if the blood gets too acidic, down here in the acidic side, cells start to die. If the blood gets too alkaline, cells start to die, your blood cells. And so we don't want that. We want the blood to stay within a regular pH. So we have proteins that are literally able to absorb these hydrogens if there are too many hydrogens making the blood too acidic, or absorb the bases, the hydroxyls, if there are too many of those making it too basic. So in that way they act as pH regulators. If you have too much acid in the blood, that's called acidosis. You'll see that a lot in the hospital. If you have too much alkaline in the blood, that's called alkalosis. That's also a very common thing you'll see. And it can be caused in various ways. And in pathophysiology, if you go in to get your BSN, you'll learn the differences between metabolic acidosis and respiratory acidosis, or metabolic alkalosis and respiratory alkalosis. Proteins are going to act as this buffer system just because their structure is able to absorb those hydrogen bases. Remember, just going back to the idea that the shape of a protein determines its function, and we never can get away from that. Okay, proteins can also act as transporters in the body, and so one of the main reasons they do this is because proteins are water soluble. They can mix with water. Whereas fatty substances typically cannot mix with water, just like when you cook something and the fat rises to the top. So what's going to happen here is that the proteins are going to create little containers to ferry around things that aren't easily dissolved in water, things that are lipid soluble. So here we see that proteins can carry around iron in a little carrying structure called ferritin, also known as, and there's another form called transferrin. So like ferrin is ferric is the scientific word for iron. Transfer is transferring, so it's a play on words. Transferring ferrin, transferrin. Transports iron in the blood. Or hemoglobin transports oxygen. It actually uses iron to do that as well. Or lipoprotein transports lipids, fatty acid molecules, cholesterols. And you get these proteins around it that allows it to be soluble to carry it around in water. Another way that proteins can move stuff around is embedded in a cell membrane. They can act as little channels or pumps to move things across a membrane one way or the other. And so it's always the proteins in the cell membranes that do this. Antibodies are also made out of protein. Antibodies are part of your immune system, and here's what happens. If you have an infection, and that infection can be a bacterium or a virus, or it could even be a cancerous cell, a cell that's gone bad in your own body, all of those, bacterial cells or viruses or cancer cells exhibit proteins on them that signify that cell or virus as something that's bad. And then these antibodies can attach to that protein, basically mark it for destruction by the rest of the immune system. So antibodies are your first line of defense and immunity, and they are made out of protein. Your proteins can be a source of energy if needed. So your body proteins, if you don't have enough carbs or lipids for energy, your body proteins can be broken down to amino acids, and then those amino acids can go through a process to generate ketone bodies or glucose. There's different pathways. I'm not going to go through all of those right now, but they can be used for energy. We'll go through a little bit more specifically how that works in another segment. Proteins are what is one of the main things that causes blood clotting. So for instance, there's a protein in the blood called fibrin that whenever there is a tear in your blood vessels, those fibrins join together and form a net that catches your blood cells before they can leave the body. Proteins act in vision, so there are proteins that are able to absorb light and basically they pass on an image to the brain. I'm not going to go into all the physiology of vision. You should get that in A&P 2. Those are just a few of the things that proteins can do in the body. Those are kind of the hits, the greatest hits. But we could go on and on. We could have a whole class, as in a semester class, talking about different roles of proteins in the body. But those are the highlights.